Why did the Titanic, which took 1,200 days to build, sink in just 2 hours? April 10, 1962, that was the day the world's biggest and most expensive ocean liner, the Titanic, was all set for its very first voyage. The Atlantic was super calm that day, with no sign of any storms anywhere. The ship was already carrying 1,500 passengers, and millions of people were standing on the docks, eager to watch the Titanic's maiden journey begin. Neither the passengers, nor the crowd saying goodbye, nor the Titanic's crew had any idea. Who would have known that the ship set to sail in just a little while was built with 6 major mistakes that would lead to one of the worst disasters ever? In this video, once again, we'll tell you about the 6 crucial errors made in building the Titanic, the most expensive, most luxurious, and strongest airplane of its time. If these mistakes hadn't been made, the Titanic might have been famous not for its crash but for its success. So, what were these 6 mistakes that even Captain Edward Smith, with 40 years of experience, failed to notice? Forget about 40 years of experience, these mistakes were missed even by the company operating the Titanic, White Star Line, which had experience running 107 ships. On top of that, the manufacturer of the Titanic, Harland & Wolff, didn't catch these mistakes either, even though they had built over 500 ships before the Titanic. Construction of the Titanic began in 1997, and after almost 3 years and the hard work of 2,000 workers, the ship was finally ready. The ship was now completely finished. But the decision to test it was still pending. The makers of the Titanic didn't have full confidence until Tata successfully completed its first test run. As soon as the test was passed, it was marketed worldwide under the tagline, "Unsinkable Titanic," meaning a ship that would never sink. Its maiden voyage was set to start from Southampton, England, on April 10, 1962, with New York City as its destination. The cost to travel in a famous section of the Titanic was $30. Updates about traveling first class on the Titanic and the parlor. Because of this marketing buzz, all the tickets were suddenly sold out. Finally, the day arrived when the Titanic was about to embark on its maiden voyage. Mistake number 1. At exactly noon, the Titanic set off on its first journey, and right away, Tata's mistakes started showing. Captain Smith had a strict deadline: no matter what, the ship had to reach New York by April 17. So, the captain pushed the ship's speed from the very start. They were going way too fast, and that was Titanic's very first mistake. Captain Smith was under pressure from the owners to get to New York as quickly as possible because this was Titanic's maiden voyage. If they didn't make it to the New York Times on time, Titanic's reputation would take a huge hit. No matter what machine or vehicle you're talking about, there are lots of operating procedures, and speed limits are always part of those rules. But right from the start of the journey, they ignored that part. Mistake number 2. It had been 3 days since the Titanic set sail. After a short stop in France and Ireland, the Titanic had been steadily heading towards New York for the past 72 hours. It was the evening of April 14, 1962. The sea was quiet everywhere, and thick fog had set in, making visibility really poor. That same night, another ship, which was a few hours ahead of the Titanic, had its captain send a wireless message to the Titanic about icebergs floating in the ocean. The experts warned at least 6 times, but due to the operator's negligence, these crucial warnings were missed. Maybe it was normal for them, but this was actually the second sign of the Titanic disaster. After all, Tata had built its first ever luxury ship, and there were many VIPs on board. That's why most of the attention was on serving the first-class passengers. If they had taken that warning seriously, the whole situation would have played out very differently. Mistake number 3. The Titanic was rapidly heading straight into the iceberg zone, moving recklessly and without fear. But the ship could still have been saved because the lookouts were on alert, ready to warn the captain as soon as they spotted any ice from afar. The problem was, they didn't have one crucial thing: binoculars. Yes, the lookouts were alert, but without binoculars, they couldn't see far enough ahead, and that's what led to the Titanic's third major oversight, which the captain, Smith, was never informed about. It was around this time when the ship's lookouts reported that right ahead of the ship, there was an iceberg as big as a football field. But it was already too late, the iceberg was extremely close. Mistake number 4. Because the Atlantic Ocean often has icebergs, big ocean liners usually handle them easily. Maybe Captain Smith thought the same. As soon as he got the news, Captain Smith ordered the ship's engines to be stopped and also commanded to change the Titanic's course. No doubt, Captain Smith tried hard to avoid the iceberg. But the distance was so small that doing anything turned out to be useless. The iceberg was now hidden behind the center of the Titanic, but there was still a good chance to avoid it. That hope was that maybe the iceberg wouldn't damage the ship's body. Or maybe, it would hit on its own and sink, and that probably would have happened if the fourth mistake hadn't come into play. Experts believe that the ship's body was reported to be made of cast iron, not steel. These rivets worked to hold large pieces of iron together. It happens, but since cast iron is softer than steel, the spots where the hull was hit cracked open due to pressure. Exactly what Captain Smith feared happened. Mistake number 5. The Titanic had collided with an iceberg as big as a football field, and now water was starting to flood the lower parts of the ship. This dangerous collision put the entire crew and passengers on high alert. At the same time, Joseph Bruce Ismay, the owner of the Titanic on board, knew that although water had started entering the ship, the Titanic still had a chance to survive. There was still hope because the Titanic was designed so that even if water filled up 3 of its floors, it still wouldn't sink. But unfortunately for the ship, water had crossed those 3 floors and reached the 4th. Now things were out of control. The Titanic was slowly sinking section by section. Forgetting about the ship, the passengers on board now had to focus on saving their own lives. Mistake number 6. Captain Smith sent out an emergency alert over the radio. While waiting for help to arrive, the plan was to move passengers into lifeboats. But at that moment, the 6th mistake showed its effect. There were supposed to be a total of 32 lifeboat spots on the ship, but due to negligence, only 20 boats were available. There were 1,500 passengers, but only 20 boats. Chaos was everywhere, and everyone wanted to get on one of the few lifeboats. At 12:45, the first emergency boat was lowered into the sea, but another problem happened here too. In all the confusion, the boats were launched without being fully loaded, and most of the first-class passengers, meaning the richer people, were given priority. At first, people were seated in the lifeboats, but if too many passengers were put on board, who knows how many would have survived. The Titanic was quickly sinking into the sea. At 2:18, because of a short circuit, all the lights went out. Moments later, the ship broke into 2 parts. It took the Titanic a full 2 hours and 40 minutes to completely sink beneath the ocean. Around 1,500 to 1,600 people drowned in the freezing waters of the Atlantic Ocean. One more thing to mention, the water temperature at that time was -2 degrees Celsius, meaning if the passengers ended up in that icy water, even if they had worn life jackets, there was basically no chance of survival. Humans can't live more than 30 minutes in such cold temperatures. They say the number of people who died was way higher than 1,500, because many of those who knew the ship was under attack had actually boarded without tickets. Among the survivors, most were little girls and kids. Meanwhile, Captain Smith spent all his time trying to keep people calm, and he was the last man to jump off the sinking ship.